Hey, what is going on? It is Thursday, January 27th, 2022, and I am excited to bring you yet another video on hemoglobin. So, I'm going to come to the conclusion of the hemoglobin alpha series. Sorry, not to mix with alpha beta subunits, not to get you confused. Um, and I will be re recording all of these with a much better understanding of hemoglobin moving forward at some point. But for now, I just want to wrap this up with the canonical topics in hemoglobin. I'll be doing a review video on hemoglobin later on in the week. So I will be going through all the different pieces that I've talked about so far, from the structure of hemoglobin to the differences between maternal and fetal hemoglobin, to the details regarding hemoglobin stabilization and relaxation, and R state formation, and T state conformation, and oxygen binding affinities and whatnot, just top to bottom, because there's, again, a lot of canonical subject matter that would allow one to form a hemoglobin syllabus, so to speak. And so that's kind of how I want to approach these and other lectures moving forward. Yeah, I want to kind of go through the syllabic or canonical material, and make sure I'm an expert at it, because we're going to need all of that if we want to discover the secret to eternal life. Yes, I said it. Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about hemoglobin and altitude. Okay. So this is, again, one of the main subject matters when it comes to hemoglobin. What happens when you go to a higher altitude? Well, when you, like, say, take a run up in some kind of mountain range or something like that, there's less oxygen available. And why is there less oxygen available? Well, due to gravity, right? At levels close to sea level, you're going to have a higher partial pressure of oxygen in the air mixture that you're breathing in. And for those of you who remember your basic science, the proportion of oxygen per volume of air is about 21%. So let's say if you have at sea level, I believe the partial pressure or the atmospheric pressure is 760 mmHg, or that's 1 atm, 1 atmospheric pressure. The oxygen that you have that you'll breathe in is about 21%, or like 120 something partial pressure. Remember, partial pressures of gas add up to the total pressure, right? In simplified gaseous situations, right? Which is what essentially air is, a mixture of the simple gases like oxygen, nitrogen, etc. So when you breathe in this oxygen, you at sea level, like where presumably most people are, they have the standard process of the hemoglobin in your red blood cells absorbing the oxygen, and you have your standard oxygen binding situation going on, right? So that's here, right? Now, what happens is at lower partial pressures of oxygen, higher in the atmosphere, you have logically less oxygen available, right? And so what's going to happen? You're going to essentially hyperventilate, right? Because the ventilation processes of your body require you to breathe more oxygen in, so that you can get more oxygen, and your hemoglobin can capture more oxygen, and thus you can transport more oxygen to exercising tissue. Now, this is not really a good situation overall for your body in a long-term sense. Like, you, in some ways, need that temporarily, and actually that's why a lot of athletes do oxygen deprivation training, because they use this fact to strengthen their cardiovascular systems, which to allow them to tolerate lower oxygen conditions. It's because essentially your heart is going to be working overtime to pump blood, to bring that blood to the tissues that need that oxygen right away. And again, this puts stress on your circulatory system and your heart, right? I don't know how often it is for people to have heart attacks at higher altitudes, but there's probably some correlation. Anyway, so what we talked about before was we need essentially a way. Our body needs a way to kind of make our oxygen in a safer way, make our oxygen binding process more efficient. So we need to end oxygen release process. So essentially we need to be able to release oxygen faster in this area here, right? So let's say if you have a person at sea level, right? Let's not go that. Let's go here. If we have a person at sea level, right? We need we don't need to worry about reduced oxygen affinity, but at a higher altitude, remember there's ways of stabilizing the hemoglobin earlier so that the affinity for oxygen lowers at higher partial pressures, so the delivery of oxygen is faster. So 2,3 BPG, remember 2,3 BPG? That's one molecule. 2,3 BPG is a molecule which fits in the center of the hemoglobin. And then remember, it's this guy, bisphosphoglyceric acid. It fits, or bisphosphoglycerate. It fits within the center of the hemoglobin molecule, which then allows it to give up its oxygen faster. And that essentially, that your body will, at higher altitudes, promote synthesis of this molecule, and thus, see, that's basically where it fits in. If you remember, it stabilizes the positive central region between the different subunits, and particularly the beta subunits of the hemoglobin molecule, right? So once that happens here, then your body, your curve, your oxygen saturation percentage changes, the function of the partial pressure of oxygen, and that means that it changes at a higher altitude. It goes over, right? This is the mouse version of it. It goes over to the left, or to the right, sorry. And let me find a good curve for that. It goes over to the left, to the right, and that means that the oxygen releases more effectively in lower partial pressure areas, which is your standard tissue. In your lungs, it's about the same, because your lungs have a certain partial pressure of oxygen, which causes the saturation of oxygen in hemoglobin to be about the same. But as the partial pressure goes down, meaning as we approach the tissue region, red blood cells approach the tissue region, the oxygen releases from the red blood cells, from the hemoglobin, more easily because of the 2,3 BPG stabilization. So that's just something we wanted to talk about as far as high altitude, something that's interesting and something for you to look into. So the last thing I want to talk about as far as hemoglobin is concerned today is alpha-hemoglobin stabilizing protein. So this is one interesting thing about hemoglobin, that hemoglobin has the genes. Your genes have twice as many alpha subunit producing genes than beta subunit producing genes. So what does this mean? That if your rate of production of hemoglobin, let's say in the stage at which hemoglobin is synthesized by your ribosomes, stays the same for all of its components, that means you'll have twice as much alpha subunit than beta subunit. And I don't know why this is. Evolutionarily, there's probably a lot of theories as to why the alpha subunit production dominates by 2 times, a factor of 2, the beta subunit production. Specifically due to genetics. But what ends up happening is that alpha subunit is extra. It floats around your blood if it's not connected to your beta subunits, and it kind of clumps together, because I guess these alpha subunits kind of attract each other, and they aggregate. And because they do that, you can imagine that they allow or they lead to several different blood conditions, right? So once that happens, right, what's your body going to do? So your body, instead of correcting that process, or instead of getting rid of that extra alpha gene, because there's probably some other reason why it's needed, what it does, it has a special protein which it creates. And it always amazes me when the body, evolution has allowed the body to come up with something to counteract something that it can't undo. And this situation is called, in this case, the alpha hemoglobin stabilizing protein. And what that does, the alpha hemoglobin stabilizing protein has an affinity for these alpha subunits, and so it connects to these alpha subunits, right? And it essentially, the thing is with the alpha subunits, when they clump together, they kind of form aggregate material that's not soluble in blood plasma, and that's the reason why it's in a problem. You can imagine things not being soluble in your blood lead to things like clotting situations or even other diseases of your blood. So this alpha subunit, this alpha hemoglobin stabilizing protein allows a creation of something that is soluble, and thus it's essentially more easily carried by your bloodstream. And so what eventually happens is that this alpha subunit, extra alpha subunit, is not necessarily wasted. At some point, once this aggregate is prevented from being formed, a beta subunit will come by and then form that hemoglobin. And so that will be the normal situation. I'm not sure at what stage that occurs, when the alpha hemoglobin stabilizing protein is kind of whisked away, but essentially the reason why that occurs is because there's a lower energy situation between the alpha hemoglobin stabilizing protein and the beta subunit. The beta subunit essentially removes that AHSP protein, because again it's a lower energy conformation, lower energy state to bind to the alpha subunit. And so basically that's what happens in your blood to correct a situation where genetics has introduced an anomaly to your blood, your hemoglobin production amount or process. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Tomorrow I'm going to go into probably more blood-specific related physiology, some sickle cell anemia stuff to wrap it up. That's a canonical end topic to the study of hemoglobin. And yeah, that's it. So with that, enjoy and like and subscribe and whatever. I'll see you later.